There was a scene at the end of Season 6, Episode 6, where Kim turns from one road to another. This was for many considered as her literal turning point onto the bad choice road that many like to quote. This is going to be my approach to the whole bad choice road discussion. As striking as the visual is, I think it's clear that this turning is not really Kim's entrance onto the bad choice road, but instead something to solidify her path on it. One thing particularly revealing so far about Season 6, and a scene that has been largely overshadowed by many of the other events, is a flashback scene for Kim, one of the only two that we've had, both focusing on Kim and her mother. During the most recent flashback, we witness a young Kim, caught after attempting to shoplift. While she's being detained in what we can assume is the manager's office, her mother arrives. She acts angry and thankful toward the manager, shocked at Kim's actions, and interestingly calls her Kimmy. Kim's mother encourages the manager to call the police, stating to nip it in the bud. Kim says she'll never do it again, and her mother says she's going to make Kim pay for it. As they leave and walk to the car, her mother switches her mood, laughing at what she had just stated, and proud of her stealing, giving her a pair of earrings that Kim ends up wearing for the entirety of the series. An important visual moment of this scene was Kim receiving the earrings. It's quite a clear parallel to Jimmy's own ring that he gets from Marco at the end of Season 1. Debatably prior to the point of gaining this ring, Jimmy wasn't quite on that bad road just yet. In fact, I would argue quite the opposite. It's only after the whole chimp with a machine gun speech and his going back to Cicero that I think he's set on this bad choice road. The ring is clearly symbolic of that. I think it is also somewhat silly to watch a show like this and suggest there is a moment when a character becomes something. There was no clear moment Walter White became Heisenberg, much the same with Jimmy becoming Saul. It was a long process, which required the input of many individual events, and even then, Jimmy and Saul are still one of the same. They aren't distinctly different people. The ring is the clearest point though. Maybe not of becoming Saul, but the idea that he is now on the bad choice road, or maybe more so that he is committed to that road. It was pretty interesting therefore that this turning point happens in the early days of the show, when Jimmy is in his early 40s. Kim's equivalent earring moment happens way back when she's in her early teens. One thing I did after watching that scene was think back to Season 1. If Kim really has been this way since her childhood, and is debatably set on that path since that moment, is there anything to suggest it in the early seasons, flashbacks aside? I've been listening to a ton of the audio commentaries for episodes recently, and one thing that caught my attention all the way back for a Season 1 commentary was a note that was made on Kim about this small jitter thing she does.
Yeah, that little thing raised under their hand there.
Yes, and she was doing that in the lobby too. She has this little shake with her foot. Like she has this repressed energy.
Is it the cocaine?
It was mentioned as a sign of pent-up energy, this being something we see persist up to Season 6, particularly noticeable around the points of scams or cons, like when Kim is waiting for Cliff to arrive for their hit-and-run con, this excitement seemingly only being expelled once a con or scam has been executed. Before long, this jitter returns. It's interesting seeing as far back as Season 1, that this urge and anticipation was there, the built-up energy ready to be let out. I think this almost makes it clear that Kim was somewhat destined to be that way since this earring moment, her start down the road. It's further interesting to have this visual occur once more, in the flashback scene where she is caught stealing. This expression of bad choice road originally comes from Mike, where he specifically states that what puts you on a certain road can sometimes be small, maybe even seeming insignificant. He further says, you think about getting off, but eventually you're back on it.
We all make our choices, and those choices, they put us on a road. Sometimes those choices seem small, but they put you on the road. You think about getting off, but eventually you're back on it.
This being something we see both Jimmy and Kim do. Jimmy was always far more inconsistent, and slipping between the two sides more erratically. Kim, on the other hand, was able to push it back for what seems to be around 20 years. It's worth noting that in Howard's final speech, he mentions to Kim that she has a piece missing, and based on her facial expressions, this clearly digs deep and rings true. In her early life, the person who enabled her behaviors was her mother, it seems. Possibly seeing the danger in this is why Kim moved away, and started anew in Albuquerque. Her piece missing, and the thing that reignited this memory of her mother and let loose the energy that had been held back for years of grinding away and working hard, suppressing this inner need, was Jimmy. I would like to think this is proven through their very unique relationship, that in many ways doesn't seem like a typical relationship. Their relationship is quite a quiet and unstated one. It doesn't necessarily hinge on love or romance. It seems to stem from a genuine understanding of one another, as cheesy as it sounds. They both appear to be the other's missing piece. The missing piece line seems to be a callback to Howard and Kim's conversation in the courtroom in season 5, where Howard suggests that Jimmy did this to her, a thing that Chuck also suggests back when she gets Mesa Verde over HHM due to Jimmy's number switch. He notes Jimmy has tainted her almost. This angers her both times.
It makes no sense to drop a client like Mesa Verde. And I kinda think Jimmy had something to do with that.
Do you have any idea how insulting that is? I make my own decisions. For my own reasons.
You gotta listen to me.
It's interesting upon reflection because it makes you view her in a different light. Kim is a character that has often been perceived as a product of Jimmy and his involvement in her life. Even us as the audience has often seen Kim as someone who has evolved due to Jimmy, when in reality Jimmy is just a piece, and the missing piece, that was required to enable that side of her. Not cause it, but just coax it out. It's a clear distinction to be made, I think. Jimmy is a character constantly flipping between the two roads, with events causing him to drive down each. He may take a brief moment on the good road, like his time in the mailroom when he straightened out, or his time at Davis and Maine, but ultimately, as Mike says, you're always eventually going back to the bad road once you've started down it. For Kim, a character who is made of sterner stuff, as Mike puts it, was able to truly repress this need inside of her for what was an extremely long time, certainly longer than any amount of time Jimmy has managed to. Upon Jimmy's arrival, Kim too begins to flit, and he begins to flit more than he usually does. And again, ultimately, as Mike says, the bad choice road, once set on, is inevitable. In a way, Kim's switch compared to Jimmy, it's darker. It's something that's dug its way in as a child. It's something I would argue she is even aware of, and notably trying to suppress. There's a small look she gives her mother after the earring incident, which is very similar to that of her look to Jimmy when he lies about Chuck to get reinstated. I think this was probably the moment she realized she had to get away, before she became something she didn't want to be. The difference being that this time with Jimmy, she didn't pull away. She stood by. The approval of her mother, this enabling, is all it took. She's been on the road for a while, it seems, or avoiding it for a while. Realistically, her entrance onto the bad choice road precedes that of Jimmy even, who has this truly dug into him after the death of Marco and the early admittance of Chuck's sabotage. He was always a bit of a delinquent, slippin' Jimmy, but that was more who he was. It wasn't necessarily the moment he came to be on the bad choice road, because I don't think we're meant to take it as simply a road that is walked down when people do bad things. Both Kim and Jimmy's fate to return to the bad road was struck by close family members, but it's worth noting that Kim's happened decades prior to Jimmy, an alternate interpretation being that they both entered onto it in childhood. Although I think the significance of the ring and the earrings are meant to be the indicators for when the bad choice road was entered onto, or when there was full committal to that path. There's a notable moment in the episode Bad Choice Road that I want to highlight, which I think illustrates this really well. There's a scene at the very start, which is quite possibly one of my favourite little montages of the show, utilising the split screen from Something Stupid's montage, and a softer hummed version of the song Something Stupid, performed by Lola Marsh. In this opening we see both Jimmy and Kim. Jimmy is out barely surviving in the desert, and Kim is back at the apartment, getting ready for the day as usual. There's something about this scene that I really love, and I feel is fairly often overlooked. I think a fairly common take is that these two routines or openings are meant to be opposites, but I think it's meant to be much more literal almost. Throughout the montage they do the same things, just in different ways. He has no signal, she does. He burns while she smokes. He's surrounded by dangerous animals, while she is accompanied by a harmless fish. His shirt is bloodied, while hers has this intentionally muddied texture to it. He wipes his face with his clothes, she washes it with water. He drinks pee, she drinks water. They're one of the same, they just have very different approaches to how they do things. At this point, these two characters are on the bad choice road, and have been for some time. Their approach to it though, and their acceptance is far different. I think Kim's presence on the road is intentionally underplayed, and something that is not meant to look as striking or obvious like the montage represents, fitting in with her character. Jimmy is a flamboyant, colourful character, who uses his charm. Kim is a very thoughtful, reserved reserved character who relies largely on her intelligence and knowledge. The bad choice road is something that these two characters have actively fought and tried to suppress for the betterment of those around them. Jimmy did this by trying to win the favor of his family, correct something he was told was wrong. He did bad stuff prior, but only when his brother denounced him and Marco died did he truly enter onto it. Kim did it by leaving her mother, doing the opposite and denouncing her in a sense it seems, and seemingly even emotionally cutting herself off from people, enveloping herself in her work. Only when they're together, there's that acceptance. Kim's state at the start of the series is somewhat reminiscent of the state in which we see Gene, a character who reminisces about the idea of Saul Goodman, who's trapped in his work, forced to play a part he doesn't fit, resulting in pent-up energy and considerable paranoia that often simply has to come out. My point being that the bad choice road for Kim was something she entered onto at a young age, before that of Jimmy even, but something she only truly returned to decades later, able to suppress it for years. Poor family relationships caused it for them both, and by finding acceptance in one another, their attempts to previously remain on the good road only led them down the bad.